Welcome to another episode, our fourth episode, of Phil Jordan Psychic Sleuth. In our last episode, we talked about the spirit world and possible communications from the spirit world and how things evolve after the change, the earthly change called death. And I've always been intrigued by that possibility. When I was a youngster, we used to go to a spiritualist camp in Freeville, New York, which at that time was a very active place where mediums came from all over the country, and they were very, very well-known mediums. And they gave me messages that they really had no way of knowing what they were telling me and how accurate it really was. I think one of the things about mediumship is it's a little bit different from psychic awareness or precognition or knowledge beforehand. Some people possess psychic abilities, some people possess mediumship qualities, and some people possess both. I've experienced both. And I will try to explain in these podcasts how that works so people can have generally a better understanding. We have to remember that in my psychic work, there's a lot of fraudulent people that try to take advantage of you. And I always tell everyone, if a psychic or a medium asks you to come back and bring more money or go through some foolish ritual, chances are they are frauds taking advantage of you. You should only go to a psychic or a medium when you feel the need to do that, but don't let grief, don't let sorrow, don't let frustration or anxiety take you to a psychic or a medium. Go when you're comfortable so that your own emotions don't take advantage of you. So, with that being said, one of the things that I'm often asked is, what do you think the transition from this world into the next is like? And I think that when we experience the moment of death, I think very often someone we knew and loved that is in spirit is there to greet us, to help us make that transition through the bond of love. I also think it's peace. I think it's pure peace. I think that no matter how much a person is physically suffering, as death approaches, they gain peace. And it's like is said in church, it's a peace that passes all understanding. It's a peace like we never experience in the physical world, but it's a peace that passes all understanding that takes us into the spiritual world. In my readings, I often read people's auras, the energy field that surrounds them. And I think the gifted people through the centuries have been aware of auras. We see in many of the paintings of the well-known artists that around people there's an emanation of light. And that I think they perceive as the aura. And I find that interesting because whenever I've been in attendance at a deathbed, whether it be an hour before or even 12 hours before, the person's aura, which may have been bright red because of frustrations or pain or suffering, or it may have been chaotic in its energy source, or it may have been medium to dark blue in many cases, showing that sickness, injury, whatever was subduing the physical being. But as death begins to take its place, the person's aura gets really, really beautiful. Usually it's got white and gold and silver and a lot of purple into it. And it's such a peaceful color and peaceful surrounding them. And the first experience that happened with, I was with a person who was gravely ill. There was no turning back. You knew that death was imminent. But as I looked at them, their aura became absolutely breathtakingly beautiful. So it showed me that their spirit had overcome the pain of the body, the physical pain of the body, and was at that peace that passes all understanding. And no matter how hurt they were, how difficult their death was, they had found peace. And they had found peace before they left their earthly body or as they were leaving their earthly body. From then on, I could see that a person's aura would get very beautiful just before their passing. And so I usually could tell, they're going to be gone within a couple hours. They're going to be gone within 6 hours, 8 hours, whatever. And it became a way of reading the aura that made it easier for me to work with their loved ones as a minister, a funeral director, or a psychic, or a medium, and help to prepare them and to let them know that though it appeared the person was suffering, they had found peace. And I find that very comfortable in my own world, in my personal life, that people I know and love, that they have found peace.
Do you see auras in anything else besides humans?
All living things have a spirit. The spirit is the energy force that creates the life energy for the body. And so all living things have an aura, even plants. But animals have an aura. I've worked with people. We're going to do a podcast on auras soon. But I've worked with veterinarians at trying to help them to understand where an animal may be hurt or what they may be going through. And after 60 years of reading auras, I've become quite accurate with that, and it's been most helpful.
Very good. Do you see spirits around all the time?
Well, most mediums will say, I see the spirit around you. It may not be that you visibly see the spirit, but you, in your unconscious mind or the psychic faculty of your mind, you may perceive the spirit and create within your mind what that spirit looks like. But often I see the spirits just as clear as if I was sitting talking to you, and they look just like they did in life, but usually at the best time in their life, when they had the most life energy, when their body was, youthful, so to speak. And I think that's what is talked about in biblical readings, where they carried a presence of an emanation of light around their face and around their being, and it was their energies that were emanating that beauty. And so I find that too is comforting. And I think that mediumship is something people have to be cautious with, because what I said, there's a lot of fraud in that, because so many mediums will speak in generalities. but a medium that will tell you something, and don't test them, let them tell you. Don't ask questions, and don't let them pull questions out of you. But they often speak in generalities if they're not a good medium. You want specifics. You want them to tell you something that only you and that person knew. And don't question them that way. Wait till they tell you something that only you knew. And I've had hundreds and hundreds of trivial things that only the person that I was talking to was the only living person that knew that. The only other person that knew it was the person who was deceased. And so it's really fascinating. So anyway, sometimes you see them very distinct, like I'm talking to you. Sometimes they're almost transparent, but yet you can see their features.
I remember you telling me a story one time about doing a show, and you saw somebody in the audience, and you thought they were actually there because they looked so real.
Yeah, that's a wonderful story. And tonight I want to share some of those stories, so we'll start with that one. I was doing a program at the local Holiday Inn. It was an afternoon on Veterans Day, November 11th. And the audience was seated in theater-style seating with an aisle down the center. And a woman came in with a man, and the man was wearing a World War II uniform. And I thought, well, he must have marched in a Veterans Day parade, didn't have time to change or just didn't change, and came with her to the show. And so I didn't read on them in the first part of the show, and I took a break, 10 or 15 minute break, and she left, and he left with her. And she came back, and I started the second half of the show. And I said to the woman, I says, I wanted to talk to the man that was with you. I felt I had something I needed to share with him. And she looked very peculiar at me and said, there was no man with me. And I said, oh yeah, he was wearing a World War II uniform, and I could see on his badge his name. So I told her the name, and she teared up and couldn't believe it. Her brother, by that name, had been killed in World War II. And he came to the show. Didn't pay to get in, must be, just came in. But the interesting thing is, she said, I had the chair saved for my friend who was coming to the show. I bought her a ticket. She had difficulties with her vehicle on the way, so she couldn't make it. So I called her, or no, she called me. No, that's not the way it was, because it was before cell phones. I called her, and she was home, and I said, why weren't you at the show? And she said, my vehicle broke down and I couldn't get there. And so the woman says, I saved that chair for her. It was empty the whole first half of the show. And I said, well, it really wasn't empty, because your brother was seated there in his World War II uniform. And so that was proof to her that her brother was still alive in the spirit world. A lot of people are frightened by the spirit world. And I think they're more frightened or have a fear connected with death because it's an unknown element. And I think that's sad, because in my faith, it's been proven to me that we live after the change called death. I think we leave the physical world behind, so I'm not sure that heaven's quite the way it's reported to be, but I think it depends on spirit, and you do find peace there. But I think it's peace because it's pure love, and you're with those that have gone before you, and you still surround the ones that you have left behind in your earthly pilgrimage. So I find that absolutely intriguing to me. One of my very first experiences was a long time ago. I was 16 years old. I had just found a profound interest in psychic work and spirit phenomena and stuff, and I had read a book about seances and contacting spirits in the spirit world, and I was fearful of that because it's such an unknown element. And so a group of us gathered one summer night at a friend's house, and we gathered around this round kitchen table they had, held hands, and I said, if there's anyone in the spirit, well, we said the Lord's Prayer, because the Lord's Prayer is the first prayer of exorcism to protect you from evil spirits and have good spirits surround you. And I said, we all bowed our head and closed our eyes, and I said, if there's anyone in the spirit world that wants to contact us, would you please make yourself known? And I waited with my eyes closed, head bowed for maybe a minute and a half. And I put my head up and opened my eyes, and behind one of the neighbors that was seated directly across the table from me was a man he had a very high starch collar and a bow tie, and he had wavy dark hair and a very bushy mustache. He had a pallor about him, and his cheeks were a little bit sunken, but he looked young to me. He looked like he might have been in his early to mid-20s. So I described him, and I said to the woman, he tells me that he's your grandfather. And she let go of everyone's hands, and he sort of just disappeared. And I said, I think he must have died when he was young, because he looked very young in spirit. And I think he must have died of some debilitating disease, because his cheeks were sort of sunken, and he had a pallor about him. And she said, my grandfather died when he was 24 years old. And he died of diphtheria, in a diphtheria epidemic. And so the next day she called me to her house. She'd been up in the attic, and she had a good-sized, parlor-sized picture of her grandfather, and it was exactly the person that I had seen behind her. And of course, I didn't know him because he died long before I was born. And so that proved to me that I could be sensitive to the spirit world. And so I found that extremely intriguing.
Especially at 16 years old, everybody must have been so excited.
Yes, yeah, and a little bit frightened, I think.
Yeah, I'm sure. Another question for you. If a spirit comes to you, I guess whether it's you actually see a spirit or feel a spirit, do they sometimes come to you wanting to pass on information to a friend or loved one?
Often they just want to tell their loved one that their love surrounds them. But oftentimes, because our spirit loved ones are around us, they know what's going on in our life, and they often will convey to us just their support or some information that might help us along our journey or whatever. And you asked me if I see spirits all the time. I don't see spirits all the time, but I can't conjure that up. I have to let it happen. And then, often it's when my mind is busy, my conscious mind is busy, that I will sense their presence. Like when I'm driving along and my mind is focused on driving, my unconscious mind, if the radio's not playing or whatever, I can perceive their presence. I always joke with people that my mother, who thought I was a terrible driver, I said often she is in the car with me. I can sense her presence, but if I go over the speed limit, she leaves. And She's another one that proved to me that our spirit survives, and I think I spoke about that in a previous podcast. But she appeared to me one night, and it was 6 years after her death, and she sat next to me on my bed at 3 o'clock in the morning. And she said, "Philip, you have to quit grieving me. I had my life, and you need your life. And you need to live your life. You don't need to live it grieving me." And then I realized, how could it be my mother? She's dead. So I looked next to me because she had her hand on my left thigh. And I looked and she was gone. She had dissipated. But I never grieved her one time after that, not one moment after that. I was going to the cemetery at least once a week, if not 2 or 3 times a week. And I only go there now maybe with family once in a while, or Memorial Day, or around her birthday, or whatever. But I was traipsing through waist-deep snow for 6 years in the winter trying to get to her grave. And I've known through spirit, of course, since in my work, that we go to the grave as a reminder of a life well lived. We believe that they will come closer to us at the grave, but they don't linger at the grave. They'd be more close around us in the habitat that we're comfortable in, our home or their home or whatever. So if you linger at the grave, you might have some unresolved grief that you have to deal with. But I believe that mediumship also can resolve grief, because so many people will say to me, "Does my mother forgive me that I wasn't there with her when she died?" And many, many people die in the middle of the night, like at 4 o'clock in the morning, or they'll die after their loved one has left their bedside, even if for a moment. And it's because they don't want their physical death to be a lasting memory for those who are living. They want their life to be that memory. And so I've never found anyone yet in the spirit world that was angry that their loved one wasn't with them when they died. We have a very difficult time in humanity separating the physical life and the spiritual life. We have a very difficult time in knowing that we leave our earthly things behind. We leave our material things behind. I can't tell you the number of funerals I've done as a funeral director where people will pack things into the casket, like even a can of beer or cigarettes or whatever. They've left their earthly dwelling place, their body. They left the only physical evidence of their life, their body, behind, and all their earthly possessions. And that's why I perceive the spirit world as a place of pure love and pure peace and pure beauty, because we don't need alabaster pillars and gold streets and mansions. We left that behind. That was for our physical being. And we dwell in a place of pure love around those we love. And that is where I think that our spirit dwells.
This could be a topic for a future episode, but along the lines of spirits coming to you to project a question or something to a loved one. I know you've done a lot of psychic detective type work, criminal work, with police work and all that. And have you ever had the victims come to you and to communicate something about the crime?
I feel with that I have been given information from the victim or their loved ones that have helped to direct me to evidence or to something that may solve that crime. Mm-hmm. Human grief takes 13 months to work through to to resolve grief. So usually the spirit will not come back during that time period, because if they come back and we're 3 months into grief and we feel their presence, we will know that we're going to reignite our grief. So it'll take us another 13 months. So, and usually any case I would work would be within a short time period after the death, unless it's an unresolved case, which I've worked many cold cases too and resolved them. And I do think in some of them the information has come that may have been from them. But again, information in the spirit world can be very vague. I may hear things, but it's sort of like a whisper, you know. And you have to try to understand what it is. And it's a whisper because of the energy factor within that. There's a term, a German term called poltergeist, which in German spiritual understanding, a poltergeist means noisy spirit. And that was always conveyed around hauntings, that a spirit would knock on a door or turn on a music box or something of that nature, and or make calamity within the house. And a lot of times that would happen in a household where there was an adolescent male, and people wondered why. And my feeling behind that is, when you're a male going through adolescence, you have an abundance of physical energy, an abundance of emotional energy, an abundance of spiritual energy. And maybe some of that energy has spurned off and given a spirit enough energy that they can let us know they're there, or perhaps it's just their energy spurning off from their own being that has moved an object or made it sound like someone knocked at the door. But poltergeist is a word for noisy spirit. You know, there's one question that people have asked me is, do you always know the spirits that come to you? Well, of course not, because I read for many, many people. And I've developed a great art for being able to read over the phone through doing radio shows. But I met my grandmother a long time, about probably 20 years after she had died. And probably I was about 11 years old. And she had died long before I was born. Well, not long, but 4 years. And this is a sort of a excruciating but fun story. We were poor people, but we went to a country doctor. And the doctor was a person who believed that you know, he could help you with most any ailment you had. Well, I was a young lad who had very seriously infected ingrown toenails on each of my big toes. So it got so bad that I had to go to the doctor. So we went to this doctor, and he put me in a chair, very much like a dentist chair, and leaned me back. He went into a room where he kept his medication, and he'd come out, and he had looked at my feet. They were bare, of course, and he looked at my toes. He went into that room, and he brought out a pair of electrician pliers, the blunt nose electrician pliers. And my mother was standing beside me, and he rammed those pliers under my toenail and yanked it right off. And it was so painful that I passed out. I was unconscious. And during that time that I was unconscious, I had what I thought was a dream, where I went to a barn and was going into the barn, and this woman came up, and she was dressed in probably, she was in a long brown skirt and a beige colored blouse that had puffy sleeves, high button collar. and her hair was sort of done up in sort of a Gibson girl sweep. And she said to me, she embraced me, and she says, "Philip, you can't come here now. You've got to turn around and go back." And I couldn't understand what that meant. And she turned me around, and I suddenly was awake because the doctor had put smelling salts under my nose and brought me to. And I didn't dare tell anyone about that experience, but I knew it was something unique and something spiritual. So then he did the other toe, and my mother says, "Why didn't you do it while he was out?" And he says, "Oh no, he's got to be awake for that." And so he did the other toe, and I passed out again, but I didn't have the same experience. And so we've always laughed about that. So probably 6 months, maybe a year later, I'm at my aunt's house, my mother's sister's house, and they were going through some old pictures. And there was a sepia tone picture, which the brown sepia tone pictures, and there was a woman. It was a portrait of a woman. She was wearing a similar outfit to what my dream was. And I knew it was the same woman that had come to me in the dream. And I said to my aunt, my mother, I said, "Who is that woman?" And they said, "Oh, that's our mother when she was young. And your grandmother." And at that moment, I just knew that my grandmother had sent me back. And of course, it was the same year they had found that I had a very critical heart murmur. And I think I must have been close to passing, close to the other side. She sent me back, and here I am. And so, but that also made me aware as I pondered that in later years, because I'm always thinking about my psychic stuff. She was such a beautiful, radiant being. And it was something where she just radiated beauty and love and compassion, and like a grandmother would. And her embrace was like that of her grandmother. But it made me aware that spirit will often appear to us when they were at their best, physically, emotionally, spiritually, all that. And so that's how she appeared to me. And that is an experience I had that would have been 64 years ago. And today I can remember that just like it happened this morning. Of course, the toe part, you could always imagine that. But,
can't forget that.
No.
Wow. I can't imagine the pain.
No, it was horrible. But yet there was a peace about it when I experienced that. And I think that helped me a great deal. I guess I've always been rather unique or a little bit weird. I don't know. But my work has always intrigued me.
Do you want to answer a question from somebody? Or do you have another, I guess, spirit?
Oh, I have hundreds. I have hundreds of spirit stories that I could tell people, but I will throw them in future podcasts. And if anybody has questions about my work, just send it to our email address.
Phil Jordan Psychic at gmail.com.
Phil Jordan Psychic at gmail.com. And we will include that in a future show, future podcast. And we are going to be working at trying to get an interactive podcast going where we can take calls like a radio show. And we're hoping to find somebody that can help us do that. So that would be fun too, like have a studio or something where we could do that. Okay, let's see what the questions are.
We have a question from Diane. It says, "My mother left me a set of wedding band and engagement ring with an insurance certificate showing they're worth $6,000. I have the certificate, but when we traveled a few years ago, I put the rings in their box and in what I thought was a safe place. Of course, I cannot remember where I put them, and I'm so upset I cannot find them. Can you provide any help on locating the rings that I put in a place to save? Safe place.
I think I have worked so many of those cases where people have put something away for safekeeping and it's safe from even them. When I work a case like that, I would say to myself, will the person find the rings? Are they lost forever? Were they stolen? Has somebody moved them? What has happened to these rings? And of course, the rings, of course, have sentimental value because they were connected to her mother. I believe the rings are still in her possession. At first, I was seeing a pile of towels, like bath towels, but then I felt like I wanted to lean over and open a door, like a door on a cupboard or under a sink. And I think it's got to be in the bathroom because I keep seeing the gooseneck pipe underneath the sink. Could mean it's around a kitchen, but I don't think so. I think she may have thought at one point of putting them, I feel very cold, so may have thought of putting them in a freezer, but I don't think she did do that. I think she changed her mind. And I think she will discover them, perhaps not by looking for them, but just discover them at some point. But I wouldn't be surprised if they'd be around a bathroom area. I think they were in a bedroom at one time, and before her trip she moved them, and I think they were in a bathroom area or around a bathroom. Could be a kitchen sink, but I think it's a bathroom sink.
Okay. I'll make sure I email her back, let her know what you said, and listen to the podcast. She will be happy. I have another email. May not be perfect to completely answer, during this episode, but maybe for the future ones. She's Kristen. She's asking about if you can elaborate between the spiritual and psychic abilities related to our earthly contract. Specifically, can you share this understanding of how we know or what signs we have aligned with our life contracts and fulfilling the purpose we agreed upon before incarnating? Let me finish it up. How do we know if our actions, choices, and path reflect the deeper mission or soul's blueprint intended for us to fulfill in this lifetime? If we were off course, how do we correct if needed? And how does it relate to the religious practice of repentance?
Wow, that's deep. That's very deep, and that could be a podcast, or will be a podcast in itself. We'll save that. I believe that what we're talking about is our incarnation and perhaps even reincarnation. I think we're given spiritual missions, and if we don't get them accomplished in one life, maybe we have to come back and try again. If we're meant to be a doctor in this life and we get sidetracked and become a parent to 7 children, and that makes it so we don't go to medical school, we get sidetracked, and maybe we still have that natural gift to be a doctor, and so maybe in the next life we become a doctor. And I do think that we make spiritual contact, or contracts, I should say, not only with the world around us, but with the God of our understanding, and most of all with ourselves. And I think that that's where it becomes a heart-related issue, in that we have to learn our own spirit. We have to learn to love our own spirit in overcoming the obstacles that prevent us from loving ourselves. We can become aware of our strengths and our weaknesses. We can become aware of what is right and what is wrong. One of the things that I do in my readings is if somebody says to me, "What do you think about this?" And they'll go on and ask me a question, and I will listen very carefully to what my heart tells me. Yes, this will happen. No, this will not happen. But if we can learn to integrate our instinct, our intuition, and our psychic self, and get a feeling of not in our head, but in our heart, and that takes a while to develop that, then we can fulfill our contract to our earthly life. And then also, we can overcome any obstacles. You know, I do a newsletter each Saturday for my church, well, for anybody that wants it, because I send out 500 of them now. And it always has a spiritual message. And I'm trying to show people how Jesus was put in our life as an example of how to be a decent and good human being. But he also knew his heart. And in knowing his heart, he knew his spirit, and he knew the Spirit of God that dwelt in him. And so if you listen to your heart and it tells you this is good, this is something perhaps you should follow, don't give up on that, because you'll be led to accomplishment. But if you feel faint of heart, you feel a little bit, oh, this is wrong, this is evil, this is bad, listen to that, because that's not something you're supposed to follow, because it will get you off course of your journey. And we aren't all going to be Mother Teresas, you know, we aren't all going to be popes, but we are all born with goodness. And no matter what anyone says, the innocence of a child is the goodness that dwells therein. And I know there's times parents think their child doesn't have the goodness that they really were hoping for, but yet working together you can help them to stay on track. And it may take some discipline of that person, but our own journey takes discipline. You know, our own journey takes discipline, and our own journey takes in knowing our spirit and overcoming the obstacles and progressing with our talents, with our skills, and showing the world a purpose for our life. And we all have purpose or purposes in life. And it's good we don't know what they are, because if somebody tells us to do something, we're not going to do it. But we have to wait for the Spirit of the God of our understanding within ourselves and the understanding of our own spirit. And as we grow with that, we become what we're supposed to become.
I feel like that fits when I'm trying to make what I consider a big decision, right? Whether it's, buying a car or making a career move, or just trying to understand, am I really making the right decision because of what I want to do in my head?
Buying a car is a little different than a career move. Your career move promotes your physical and spiritual self through life. Buying a car is more of a mental want. I'm tired of the car I'm driving. I'm going to get a new one. And the car you're driving could have lasted 200,000 miles, but you just want a new one. That's a mental thing. But if you feel inside, I really need to get a new car, it may be that the car you have was going to go through a catastrophic maintenance thing and it cost you lots of money. Then I would listen to that and I'd get a new car.
Makes sense.
It's hard to separate the mind and the heart in life. Very hard. And I still try to do that. But I also try to do that for others in my consultations with them and in my counseling with them and in my journey in my church. The church I'm pastor at, I think the best thing we can do to honor Jesus and honor the God within ourselves is to become all that our spirit is capable of becoming. Because that's why God sent Jesus, to become an example of how to be a spiritual human being and how to be a decent human being. And we do get off track, as this woman said. How do we get back on track? I often get back on track just through prayer or meditation. my message I've done for Saturday is I felt like I was losing a bit of faith recently, and I come to realize through prayer and meditation, I'm not losing faith in my faith. I was losing faith in humanity, because there's things happening in our world that are not, they don't follow the tenets of my belief.
Gotcha.
So that's that.
All right. Pretty much concludes this episode. What do you think's up for the next one or two?
Well, I think we still will talk about our own spiritual journey a little bit, but I think I will talk probably about how to become more aware of our own spirit and use that in our journey to better our lives in general.
Awesome. Sounds good.
You know, I think that so often, well, there's a scientific study right now that says that the human brain is not fully developed till you're around 24 or 25 years old. Well, between the age of 18, when we graduate from high school, and 25 is when we make all major decisions. And we're making that at a time when our brain ain't fully developed. And so we make decisions about career, education, marriage, children, military service. We make all those decisions. And I think that we have to learn how to have those decisions guided by our own spiritual understanding of ourselves. And so I'd like to talk a bit about that maybe in our next trip. Because all of my psychic stuff and mediumship stuff happened when I was in my mid-teens, and I was right in the middle of adolescence. And so maybe we can enlighten the listeners to some of that. I hope people are enjoying my podcast. I hope I'm not offending anyone's religious belief, but if I am, just turn off the podcast. I'm just conveying what I feel. And again, I convey what I feel is truth within my work, but I also convey to you things that might be of help to you in your journey. And I do wish we'd get some more questions sent to us at
that Phil Jordan Psychic at gmail.com.
Phil Jordan Psychic at gmail.com. And if anyone would like a phone consultation or house party local to my locale, just call my office. The phone number is on my website, philjordan.com. And get my new book, A Winter's Journey. That's turned out to be wonderful.
Very good. Well, thank you very much.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.